Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel. Today we're going to be doing the top 5 best decks for the Milwaukee Regionals. Of course, Milwaukee is this weekend. I will be in attendance. This is going to be the last tournament I will be attending in the Scarlet and Violet meta, and I'm excited to see what the top 5 is going to look like, because I do think that the meta is in a very interesting spot right now heading in to Milwaukee. And let me know in the comments if you're going to be going to Milwaukee and what you think of my top 5 video. And without further ado, let's get into the top 5. Number 5 is going to be Gardevoir. Now, Gardevoir is still kind of holding on decently strong in the meta. Obviously, the deck does have a pretty rough time against Lost Box, and Lost Box is super popular, and it's going to be hard for Gardevoir to compete with the popularity and power of Lost Box right now, but I do think Gardevoir is still in a fine spot. Gardevoir still has the tools to beat Lost Box. It's not like a complete auto-loss, but it is very unfavored, and Gardevoir definitely has more competition now with the popularity of Umbreon VMAX being popular. So definitely Gardevoir's got some thick competition, but it's still a pretty strong deck regardless. I think it's definitely a top 5 deck, even if it is still on the downswing. The deck is still strong, and I wouldn't be surprised if you yourself probably hit like 2 or 3 Gardevoirs throughout the entire tournament. It's still popular. People still play it. People still respect it. It's still doing decent in like League Cups and stuff. It's not completely gone from the meta. It's definitely still a top 5 deck in the format, in my opinion. I definitely think you've got to respect the Guardy deck. I do think the deck is still strong and can still win games against stuff like Lost Box, even if Lost Box aren't as favored as people may think. But let's see what we got at number 4. And coming in at the number 4 spot is Dura. I still think Dura is a solid deck right now in the format, and it's still one of my favorite decks to play. And I think this deck is great for Milwaukee. Obviously, it saw a ton of success in Hartford, and that definitely will impact how many people will play it in Milwaukee. This is not really a deck you can straight up just like counter. Like, the best way to beat it is to just out-tempo it, donk the Arceus before it evolves. It's not a perfect deck by any means, but I do think the deck is still fairly strong in the format. It boasts a pretty good Lugia matchup, in my opinion. As long as you're able to take out that Urshifu before it evolves, you're probably just chilling. And obviously, I think it's got a fine matchup against Gardevoir, and Lost Box is also not too bad either for this deck. I think Dura is a fantastic deck, and I wouldn't be surprised if it saw more play in Milwaukee. We'll see how it performs, because again, it did see a ton of play and saw a lot of success in Hartford, and that will definitely impact how much play it'll see in Milwaukee at the end of the day. I don't know what other improvements could be made to the deck. Again, my Dura list I didn't play the Adventurous Discovery, but Discovery does seem to be really good, so probably going with the Adventurous Discovery route is going to be the way to go. I'm not sure what techs and stuff this deck can really play now to going forward to kind of improve its matchups or anything like that, but we'll have to see how the deck kind of evolves going into Milwaukee, because I do think the deck is still very strong. I think a lot of people will still play it because it's Arceus at the end of the day. It's still a strong deck. I think the deck's biggest worry is going to be the decks above it, specifically the next deck that we will get into here at our number 3 spot. Because at number 3, we got Mew. Now, Mew has risen in stocks recently, mainly after its double win during Hartford's weekend, and also winning in Malmo. Now, Mew is in a pretty interesting spot right now. The Fusion build of Mew seems to be back in the discussion thanks to it winning Hartford, and Fusion Mew is definitely a pretty solid deck right now. I do think that its matchup against Lost Box will still always be a little tricky, but the nice thing about Fusion Mew is just how aggressive and strong it is against the V-Star deck, specifically Dura. I think Dura's popularity is going to be very big in Milwaukee, and that will give a lot of people reasons to play the Meloetta build of Mew, because when you're able to donk an Arceus V turn 1, it can be uber devastating for the Arceus deck to really come back from that. And I think that's the big thing with Meloetta Mew, is with the popularity of Arceus right now, not just Dura, there's also obviously Tina. It'll definitely improve with how good Meloetta Mew is. I think Meloetta Mew is in a pretty good spot right now in the format, because I think that just being able to donk Arceus Vs is pretty good, and it could be good against Lugia. Obviously, being able to donk a Lugia is pretty good. The Fusion build does give you a better time potentially into Lugia itself if they actually do get to set up, because they're able to obviously take advantage of the Tyranitar and the Yveltal, which can be a pretty big obstacle for Mew to get over once Lugia sets up. So Mew's definitely in a pretty decent spot right now, I think, at number 3. Is it the best deck ever? Not really. I think Mew can still struggle very much against Lost Box, because Lost Box can still very easily beat it when they have access to stuff like Drapion and Kyogre, and the Meloetta build seems to be a bit weaker into Lost Box because you don't play Judge, and Meloetta is still easy to knock out because they can just cram you, though you do have that one of Deoxys, which does help a little bit against that deck, but we'll have to see where Meloetta Mew goes. Of course, DT Mew is also still pretty good right now, though. DT Mew is still fine, right? It does have a bit of a weaker mirror match, I would say. You do have the heavier path, which is nice, but again, the threat of Meloetta is always there. there. I think Fusion Mew and Double Turbo Mew are both just pretty solid decks right now. I actually think they're both kind of ranked in the same spot at like number 3 combined together, because I think that Mew is great right now in a field full of Arceus, and even in a field full of like Lugias can be pretty nice for the deck too. So we'll have to see where it goes going forward in Milwaukee. And of course, at number 2, we got good old Lugia. Lugia just always seems to be the second best deck, or at least it's competing for number 1, obviously. I don't know if Lugia will ever move past number 2, maybe with Paldea Evolve, we'll have to see. But yeah, once again, Lugia is still basically the second best deck for Milwaukee. A lot of people will just play Lugia because it's very straightforward, still easy to play. It is more of a casino, obviously, with all the coin flips you got to do. But I think that Lugia is still just a fantastic deck right now, and still very good going into Milwaukee. I would even argue that it's even better going into Milwaukee because of Mew winning. Mew winning could give Lugia more reason to see more play, because I think Lugia actually beats Mew. Again, as long as you're just able to set up, Mew's pretty easy to beat, because you just have Tyranitar and Yveltal and Gift Energy, which are very hard for Mew decks to checkmate that. So it is pretty tough to take down Lugia once it sets up, and Lugia is still just good against mostly everything in the format. I do think that its Dura matchup is still kind of 50-50 because of the fact that your Urshifu is always going to be targeted, and if they're able to just knock out the Rapid Strike or the Single Strike Urshifu VMAX, you're kind of just screwed. So the Dura matchup is still a little shaky, but it's not unwinnable. You can easily beat them if you just Urshifu their Dura, you just win the game. If you set Urshifu up, you're probably big chillin'. So Lugia is still perfectly fine in the format. At the number 2 spot, still the second best deck to play right now, in my opinion, and it's still going to be a ton of Lugia at Milwaukee, and it's just always going to be a popular deck, even when we get Paldea Evolved. I think Lugia will still just be that good. And again, I think it might just get even better now with Mew potentially being even more popular. There's more reason now to play the Tyranitar and Yveltal and stuff. I did have one quick honorable mention I wanted to give before we get to the number 1 spot. Yeah, there's only one honorable mention. I feel like most of the other decks that we didn't talk about are just not yet in the discussion. Maybe something like Gudra could be like number 6 or 7 or 8 on the list, but even that, I think Gudra just gets worse now that Mew's popular, and also the fact that Duraludon is popular. But I think Arctina is still holding its own in the format. I think it's definitely a number 6 spot. Arctina is just a very respectable deck to play. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Arctina see a lot of play in Milwaukee. Yeah, it does hurt that Mew is popular, once again, with the Meloetta. Again, Meloetta can always be tough for an Arceus deck to deal with. I think that Arctina should just start playing Drapions now in order to beat. I don't even think Arcdura should play Drapion. I just think if you just put a Drapion in your deck, you're probably doing better against Mew. But overall, Arctina will still be a good deck. It's still a very solid deck to play. It does basically everything you need a deck to do. And I wouldn't be surprised if Arctina did really well, of course, in Milwaukee. And there are some ways you can improve the Arctina deck. I mean, there are different avenues you could take a deck like this going into Milwaukee in terms of beating Arcdura. Because I actually think that this deck has a decent matchup against Arcdura. This deck actually doesn't have that bad of an Arcdura matchup, which actually does help its performance quite a bit. So wouldn't be surprised if we saw Arctina do well, of course, in yeah, would not be surprised if we saw Arctina do well in Milwaukee. I think it's still a solid deck to play, and it definitely, I think, has to adapt a little bit. I don't know if, like, the Judge Path engine is as consistent as it could be. I think that the deck has to improve a little bit in order to really be able to take down the threat of the Mew. And I think if it can deal with that, I think Arctina is still great. So I definitely want to have it as an honorable mention. Definitely the honorary number 6 spot on this list. And at number 1, to no one's surprise, it's Lost Box. I mean, let's be real. Lost Box is the BDIF right now. The Turbo build is the best deck in the format. The Kyogre build, I also think, is the best way to play Turbo Lost Box. It's the one I think is the strongest. And yeah, Lost Box is just always going to be like the best deck in the format. I don't think anyone's going to be able to argue that, because it's just too good of a deck. It's super strong. Can beat almost anything in the meta. Yeah, stuff like Judge Path can hurt it. But honestly, this deck could be better if you're in a field of Meloetta Mew. With Meloetta Mew's popularity, this could actually help this deck get even more popular, because there's a bigger reason to play a deck like this if Meloetta Mew's popular, because I think this deck has a pretty good matchup versus Meloetta Mew over the double turbo build of Mew. But yeah, again, Lost Box, just BDIF. I don't think there's really much left to say about the deck at this point. It just is the BDIF. It's just that good of a deck. It's super strong, super aggressive, super good, just beats everything. Just, there you go. It's number 1 on the list. There you go. That's the top 5. Hope y'all enjoyed. I think the big introduction was just having the Mew go up in stonks. Obviously, Mew is going to be pretty popular in Milwaukee, in my opinion. We'll have to see how it performs, but that doesn't mean that it won't be popular. Just because a deck might not perform as well as it did in Hartford doesn't mean that it won't be popular. I think Mew will still be pretty popular in Milwaukee at the end of the day. And I think you just need to make sure you can beat Mew and Lost Box and Lugia, and you're probably chilling. But that is the top 5 best decks for the Milwaukee Regionals. Again, if I will be attending Milwaukee, so if you are going, don't be afraid to come up and say hi and all that good stuff. And hope to see some of y'all there. I'm excited for this tournament. Again, last tournament of the Scarlet Violet format. I'm not going to Fresno. And I'm excited to kind of dip my toes into how they evolved and say goodbye to this, honestly, kind of mid-format. I'm not going to be afraid to say it. I think the Scarlet and Violet meta was pretty damn mid. I think it was kind of boring, and I think that some of the top decks were just too cheesy, like Lost Box and when Guardy was in its prime. I think that overall, the Scarlet and Violet meta was extremely mid. Not as bad as Silver Tempest, but I think this meta was super mid, kind of lackluster. It didn't really have anything cool about it. It was just I don't know, just a very mid format. That's just my take on the Scarlet and Violet meta. But that'll be it. Hope you all enjoyed. And if you haven't subbed to the channel, make sure to click that subscribe button down below. And yeah, see y'all in another video. Bye-bye.